podcast is brought to you by Fireside.fm. Podcast hosting by podcasters for podcasters.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, been busy the last few weeks. A lot going on as always in the AI world. So
same here.
Yeah, definitely. I know there's so many things we could talk about, but I think why don't we start with something that's been an issue, I guess, with just AI coding for a long time, and it seems to be getting better, but it's still got things. It's still something you got to look out for. It's just the context problem. How do you handle the context window that the AI has to, keep up with what you're asking it to do and stuff like that. So, and before we even just dive in a little bit, it reminds me of a tweet I saw yesterday, and I don't have all the context, no pun intended, but it was an image from a developer that I follow, and the image was, I forget what it said specifically, but it was like the progress bar of the context window. It was like 10% left, and I wish I remember. I'll have to link to the tweet, but the caption basically was something like, "The fun's going to end soon," or something like that. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Like, what are the things you've done, to either help with it, or like how has it caused problems for you? Those sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, it really, and I think it's even more than coding. Like, context is such a huge thing in AI in general. It's like the more people, and myself included, have worked with it, you just realize that AI is capable of a lot, but if you don't give it the right context, it just uses whatever is, the median of the data set that it was trained on. So like, you're going to get average stuff if you don't give it context that can make it specific to what you want it to do. And, me personally, I've learned a lot to like give very detailed instruction. Like, I use Windsurf typically for my IDE. So there's context built into that, but it's still not even enough because it doesn't know like what's the right context. Like, that's the other problem, is that if you just throw everything at it, AI also struggles with like, it looks at the beginning and ending of the context you give it, not every single piece of it. So trying to manage that is like, you give it that greater overarching context, but then you have to give it more detailed, like, look here, here, and here to like really try to help narrow it in on what you want it to, versus like, I mean, letting an AI bot have free reign is like the worst thing you can do, because they don't really like you or want to work very well with you. They have their own opinions. And so like learning that and learning how to like give it parameters inside of that context even has been very helpful from my perspective.
Yeah, that's something I've run into so many times, what you just talked about how it's like, it pays attention to the beginning and like the most recent post. And it's like, it forgets so much stuff in the middle. And I feel like I'm constantly, generally I'm using Cursor and its agent. And generally it's like, you're, I don't know, maybe only like 4 or 5 prompts in. So it doesn't seem like it should have forgotten. And it's forgetting something that I told it maybe 2 prompts ago about, I don't have a good example, but let's just say I told it something specific about, I want to do it this way. I want to, I don't know, we'll use a simple example. I want single quotes instead of double quotes or something like that. And then 2 prompts later, it's like all the code it's writing is not using what I asked it for in that case. And it's crazy how quickly that happens, and you got to stay on top of it. And I'm constantly like, did you forget we talked about this?
Oh yeah, no, it happens too. Like, it's really bad if you're a front-end developer as well, because you'll give it parameters like, go look at how I've been styling this thing and style everything else like it. And it'll do it for that prompt. But then, again, like 1 or 2 prompts later, all of a sudden it's like back to Tailwind Blue, like for everything it does. And it's like, no, you got to go back and do it. And, one of the things I've played with and have had some success with is, after you go through a chat, like I usually try to keep them short and like really to the point of like
Same
one
here.
thing.
Yep.
But what I've also done, and I've done it a little bit more in like Claude, its chat interface versus Windsurf, but I think you can do it in Windsurf or Cursor as well, is like after you get through like a short prompt, have it generate a summary of the important things from what you just talked about. And then usually you can drop that in like a project in Claude or in your like global context in your IDE. And I find that helps a little bit of like giving it because it's not just like the chat thread that it's looking at. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it has, one store for that global context and then the chat thread, and it can help keep it a little more honest. Like it's not perfect. There's still those issues, but it can help at least sometimes get better results of it remembers the important things because there's not as much noise of like all of a chat window on multiple things that it's trying to figure out.
Yep. Yeah, I've done something, I've done that specific thing, but I've also done something else in some of my more recent projects, which is I create I call it current.md,
Sure.
something like that.
Yep.
It's just a markdown file, but I always start the project and I remind it every single time, like we're looking at this for direction.
Sure.
Like this is your goal, essentially, where we want to get to. And that does seem to help a little bit. At least it keeps it on task with that. And so I can go, the problem though is like, to your point, like I like to keep quick, short prompts too. I want to do like one thing and then I move on to another prompt because of the whole context issue. But every time I move to that next one, if I don't do a summary, or even if I do, I still need to be like, all right, we're still looking at current.md.
Yep.
And do this. So it's like you're like piling up all the different things you have to tell it over and over again. And it's kind of annoying in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And there's definitely tools. I think Windsurf recently brought something in that was kind of like, it's really focusing on planning now. And I think you can, to what you're doing with the MD files, you can have it create these documents that kind of sit in your repository, or you can do it manually. And it really is that anchor. And I think part of it too, though, is, if you set up the defaults at the top level, like it can definitely help. Like me personally, the one I've seen help, and it isn't even on the code side, it's on just the chatbot side, is in my instructions, I've told Claude to push back on pretty much everything I put into it, because like OpenAI has had really bad problems of like the sycophancy of the bot, where it's like everything you do is amazing, and I kind of got to a point where I'm just like, but it's not. Like I know this is not amazing, and so I've put specifically like one of the most important prompts I put in like the personality is push back on everything, and it does. Like it calls me out every time I'm like thinking about something. It's like, but I want to push back. You're kind of full of it. And it's like, yeah, I kind of am. And so you can do similar things in IDEs as well. And I haven't played as much with it, but I kind of need to push into that, where it is like setting those standards at the top level to see if it like will adhere to it a little bit better than it does. And, it's interesting too, because, Claude or, OpenAI, but ChatGPT, they've got their context models, and then the IDs have like a different type of context model for like how they manage that global state. So you'll get different results, but it is interesting how context is so much of the job now. Like writing the code isn't actually that challenging because of the AI, but like you have to stay on top of it. You have to make sure that you're like curating that context at multiple levels, and like you can't. It's not I type in a prompt and I'm done, because it's never going to be consistent. It just doesn't have the way to take in everything you've done, your entire, style of writing code and your code base and all of that. Like it just struggles with that. And so the job is moving to, how do you manage the bot? How do you keep it on target?
Yeah. Yeah. And that jives with something else I saw recently, which, there's varying opinions out there. Like AI is going to take over the world, or AI is not going to take over all the jobs, but the jobs are going to shift. And that's kind of the view of this take was, software engineers are going to basically be, there's lots of different terms, and I forget what this specifically used, but it was something along the lines of what you just described. You're going to have to learn to not just prompt it, but you're also going to need to just make sure it's doing the right things and reviewing the code, and a lot less writing of the code. And that's kind of where I feel like things are going. I've yet to see anything besides a prototype that is vibe coded in a way that at least I would ever put into production.
For sure.
Obviously people are. We talked about that in our last episode.
Yeah.
We don't need to dive too much into that, but I think what you were talking about there, is more or less where I think things are going. And, that's something that I've been doing recently. I've already mentioned earlier, like I use Cursor a lot primarily, but I have installed Claude Code recently. And what I've started with, I haven't used it a ton yet, is I've moved to using Cursor still, but I use Claude Code in the terminal. So instead of using the Cursor agent, I'm using Claude Code basically to do it. And the benefit there, like I am used to working in the terminal. I used to use Vim all the time. And for those who don't know, that's a terminal-based editor that, I don't need to get into all the specifics, but for me, it was like at the time before AI even existed or even was a thing, it was very efficient. And so it's nice to be in the terminal, but there's also something about like the way Claude Code works and having been in Cursor that this still works the way Cursor does, except it's a slight variation of it. And, I don't have a whole lot to say yet about Claude Code versus just normal Cursor or Windsurf. So maybe we'll get to more of that at some point when I get to use it some more. But, it back to the context stuff, like one of the things that Claude Code did initially, and I've used it for, I think, two different repositories, two different projects so far. And the first thing it does is it has this init command. And you hit that, and it basically generates a file that tells, it decides or figures out, what is this project all about?
Sure.
And it tries to get a context right there to say, okay, I'm working on, in this case, it was like Rails 7, and it's using Tailwind, and like all the different things that it's using that it can tell. And it's pretty good. It's not perfect, because in my case, I'm always using Docker.
Sure.
And I have all the Docker files in there, but it's not necessarily picking up that, all of your Docker commands that you're going to need are like important. Because that's another thing, going back to the whole context, that I always run into because I use Docker, is that every time if I forget and I don't tell it, hey, okay, we're using Docker, so we need to run, Docker commands, it will get to the point, and this is the Cursor agent, not Claude Code.
Sure.
But the Cursor agent would get to the point where it does its thing, and it's like, okay, now let's run the server, or let's run any kind of command, and it gives me the non-Docker version. And so that's another like annoyance where I'm hoping if I modify this Claude Code MD file or whatever it's called, I think it's claude.md maybe, but I'm hoping that I can modify that in a way that it knows every time, like, okay, we're using Docker, we need to make sure we're using these commands. So I haven't even tested that yet, but that's another context thing that, is goes hand in hand with what we've been talking about.
No, and it's interesting, on that topic, how things are starting to evolve. And I think there's a couple different paths that it could take, where like Claude Code can be your editor in the terminal, and then you use Cursor or Windsurf as your general IDE. But I think specialized tools might actually be more of a thing. And one of the things I have seen, like with Windsurf, is they just recently introduced a browser, essentially, that is a Chrome spinoff, but it boots up in the IDE. And then the agent actually has access into like the console, and it can take screenshots and actually like look at things and then pull things back into the agent. And I think there's a world where it starts to, break out of the IDE as just like your only tool, and like these things start to do different things. But there's another interesting shift that I'm seeing, and like Cursor, I don't know if you heard about it, but like all the pricing on Cursor has changed recently. And like,
I actually hadn't. No, I haven't been paying attention.
Yeah. So like everything had been like, you get credits and you use credits per prompt or per
right, which is what I'm used to using. Yep, exactly.
Yeah. And so Cursor just changed to essentially like, I think it's like work units essentially, where it's like CPU time that you're getting charged for now versus just like prompts, and people are upset about it. And like, I noticed with Windsurf, and a lot of this is because the models are so rapidly changing, and they went from being like, they're all pretty much the same model to like thinking models are now way more expensive than typical, non-reasoning models and things like that. And so your pricing is changing. And so like the flat fee is changing. And so now you have like Claude Code, you tap into an API with Claude. So you're paying for the usage that way. Yep. That's where you're kind of starting to see, these editors go as well. But you also see things like Windsurf lost access to Claude Sonnet for a while because, they were almost bought by OpenAI. So all of a sudden Claude's or, Anthropic's like, well, we're not going to let you use our model if you're going to be owned by OpenAI. And so like, I think we're getting into a world where this is going to change. Like this was the first wave with Windsurf, with Cursor, and then Claude Code kind of came along, and that's a different aspect to it. And like, there's just a lot of shifting that I'm seeing happening. And to your point, it's going to change how we approach this and evolve how we approach this. And I think it'll make some things harder. Like going back to the original thing we were talking about, like context, how do you manage context if you have to use multiple tools to do it? Like, is your code base still the place where you can keep it? And maybe like the files is the answer here, but like, I really see that things are going to start shifting in the landscape of coding and AI pretty rapidly here.
Mm-hmm. It's also interesting too, to me, and obviously I mentioned I use Claude Code in Cursor, and for what it's worth, there is like a extension. So I didn't use that, but it picks it up automatically and stuff. So like clearly they're realizing people are doing this and going to do it. But if I wasn't using Cursor and I was just using Claude Code in the terminal, that while it has the ability to vibe code anything, just like, people are doing with Lovable and all those beautiful UI, tools, this is like maybe the most powerful one right now. I don't know. I haven't compared them, but I hear a lot about how powerful it is. And that's kind of what's drawing me to it. Plus I'm using Anthropic's Claude anyways in Cursor.
Sure.
But it's very interesting to see how things are kind of like shifting towards more traditional developer setup back in the terminal for Claude Code. It doesn't have its own UI besides terminal UI. And I feel like there's other products that are kind of shifting in that way as well. And I guess my point at the moment is really just, it started out where, everything was in chatbots in the web browser mostly, or like a local desktop thing. And it was very user friendly for anyone to come and do things. But now, at least with Claude Code and maybe a couple other tools that we've seen recently, it's starting to shift a little bit, and it'll be interesting to see, do we keep going in that direction, or is this just like a stepping stone?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense though, because if you look at the greater AI, use case, ChatGPT came on the scene and everybody's like, okay, now every interface has to be a chatbot. Like it's got to be a chat. Everything's got to be chat. And like, I don't know, personally, my mind's always been like, while chat is cool, chat is so, and like it's expanded significantly, don't get me wrong, but you're still stuck in that window. And it's like, I want to do something over here, but like all my stuff is sitting in this window. And like bringing chat into an IDE that can then work with your files, like that's helped. But it's still like, I'm chatting and I've got to talk a lot to get things done. And I think what we're seeing, to your point, is, and I think this is going to happen a lot of places, is like, how can we use the AI to start to just like be a tool that isn't just like something you chat with completely, but like these things can start baking in kind of prompts on the back end, but you're just interacting with it in more natural ways of like, how would I use this application? And the AI is just in the background doing the thing to make it easier, to make it more powerful, to make it more useful. But your interface might be more of what you used to use, or something completely new, but less of just like I only work with AI through chat. And I think that's a good way to go, because like I said, like chat has its place and can do some really cool things and has expanded significantly. But I still feel so often where it's like, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be an easier way to interact with AI and take advantage of AI that isn't just another chat interface. Like they have their place, but I think there's more that can be done there.
Yeah. Yeah. You also touched on something else that I've seen recently is, I think it was called Vibe Kanban. I haven't dove into it at all, but it's almost like a different chat interface, because you basically have your Kanban board, and for those who aren't familiar, it's basically just like you got your swim lanes and you can put in your new card to say, okay, this is the ticket I want to work on. And I watched a little video on it. That's about as far as I got. But basically it's like, instead of a chat window, you put all the context in your card like you normally would anyways, if you're doing professional development anyways. And then this tool, you just hit start. And then it goes and does kind of what you described. It goes in the background. It invokes the AI agent to work on all the stuff. And then it from what I saw anyways, it was like pulling the cards through the different processes, with you checking in every time, which is a really standard concept in software development that most vibe coders are probably not familiar with if you haven't done any software development. But it's it's kind of a cool thing. I think it tied in with what you're just talking there about not always using a chat window to do this stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect point of like giving a place where you can spin off your AI, start your AI to do something interesting. But it also gives it that basis of context, because if you have all of the like ticket of what you need to work on or task that you want to do, what's interesting is that even if it doesn't do everything for you, it can also help like the boilerplate problem. Like how do I get started? Like how do I plan this? How do I tackle this? Because that's where productivity is so hard. It's not necessarily doing the thing. It's like getting started with the thing. And so like having your AI do something like that is such a good use case for it. And I think from an age, like, cause that's more like the agentic AI at that point where it's like, it's starting to automate things. But I think having the human in the loop is so important. Like, and this is where like I struggle with vibe coding. Vibe coding is so much, you're trying to take the human out of it. Like you give it the prompt, it does all the things for you. And like, it's cool. It feels like magic, like for somebody that's never built an application before, coming in, typing in what they want and getting it immediately. Like, that's a dopamine rush. That's like, this is awesome. I did something amazing in 2 minutes, like whatever. But it's also that magic feeling. Like, and like anything, when it feels magical, it's actually dangerous because you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And so like, and if it never checks in with you, if it never like tells you, okay, I've done this, check it over. And even if it does, like if you don't even know what you're looking for, like it's really, really dangerous. And that's why these tools are so powerful for people that know the field. Like they know how to program, they know how to debug, because that's the other thing that I've heard so many times is like people that vibe code, because we all know anybody that's used AI that's ever actually programmed before, they create bugs. Like just last night, I was multiple chat iterations. I had something generate for me. I looked at it and I'm like, you didn't even create the variable that's right here for me. And it's like, oh yeah, thanks for catching that. And it's like anybody that doesn't know wouldn't even think about it. They'd run it and be like, what's going on here? And so, to wrap it all up in kind of a bow is like, having context helps it create better things. But as a human, you have to have context to be able to make sure what it's creating is good and, actually push it into something that's going to be useful for you rather than just creating stuff that looks like magic, but falls apart as soon as you put any pressure on it.
Yeah. That's well put. And that's probably a good place to stop on that topic. So yeah, let's move on to our last segment here of just, what are some things we're interested in around AI and AI coding, or maybe it's just general AI stuff. You want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. The one thing that I just ran into, because I've been looking around with all of the different, like we were just talking about, like the pricing changes of Cursor and all the stuff going on with Windsurf. I ran into Kiro, which is another IDE, which I haven't played with it yet, so this is something I want to kind of play with over the next couple of weeks here. But it's interesting because Kiro, from what I can tell, is created by Amazon, but it has a little bit different approach to it. Like it really tries to create specs and then create code rather than just like diving into, creating code straight away, which I know Windsurf has introduced planning, which is kind of like that. But the other thing that I'm curious to see about is because it's owned by Amazon's put a ton of money into Claude. And so I'm curious to see, like, is all of a sudden Claude going to start shifting here? Would Claude Code start shifting in this direction? Like this is the other piece to all of this that I'm curious to see how it plays out, of like all the big companies have stakes in these things and the models. Like when does it start to get siloed and how does that change the landscape? What about you?
Yeah, well, I'll just touch on, I had just seen something about Kiro, but I hadn't really looked into it. So that's cool to hear. And I'm definitely going to take a look at that as well. I've kind of touched on the two things that are top of mind for me still right now. That Vibe Kanban thing seems pretty cool. And I think maybe putting that together with Claude Code. And again, I haven't done a whole lot with it yet, but I want to keep exploring that. But the other thing that I'll touch on, and I touched on this last episode a little bit too, is just like the swarms. That is another option with Claude. And I don't even know. I haven't looked to see if like OpenAI or anybody else has them. I'm sure they do in some capacity. But I think that specifically the Rails swarms, that was a gem that just came out. Or maybe a gem's not even the right way to put it, but a library, anyways, that helps you do that with Rails apps. And again, that's what I primarily program in, is Rails. I'd love to just, even give it a vibe coding thing, like see how far it can get. See how much better it can be at that sort of thing. I know that one-shotting something is still going to be really hard, because you're still going to have to check in, like all the things we've talked about. But yeah, those are the things that I've been thinking about, or at least been interested in here in the last, week or so. But yeah, I think I've talked about this offline, even pre-show a little bit, just about like there's certainly things that we both want to be doing with AI and AI coding that we haven't even had a chance to. So I think those are all things we don't have enough to say about them right now, but things that we can definitely talk about in the future. And, I think these will definitely, all the things we just talked about here will definitely play into that stuff too. So.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a place I want to explore a little bit too. I mean, the vibe band sounds pretty interesting. Like there's some ideas I've had around similar type stuff. So I'm going to have to dive into that a little bit too.
Yeah, and I'll put that in the show notes. On the audio version, we'll have it in the show notes on the YouTube channel. It should be down below. So, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. And why don't you like and subscribe if you're enjoying what we're putting out here, and we'll be back with the next one soon.